Some familiar faces coming in, that's nice.
Lovely to see the shrine room again.
It's good to see the shrine room again, exactly. Yeah.
One of my favourite shrine rooms.
Oh. Oh, some people have got stunning shrines. I can see photographs of them, beautiful.
Still getting used to.
Come round here and say hello to people, Shantikara, it's fine.
Hello, people. You're all in little boxes. I know that's the new normal, but it's still a bit weird.
And they're very obedient, waving immediately. Oh. There's Polly, that's nice. Is it strange seeing Shantikara in Adhisthana shrine room rather than just around the corner? Yeah, I know.
It's a bit weird.
No, it's not good, is it? It's good for us.
I don't. Hi, Polly.
Hello.
Where I live now.
I know, you're in my home.
Hey, you're in my home.
I know.
He's been a very happy bunny since he arrived. That's very nice.
That's good.
Overall.
Overall, okay, overall. It's in the dark bits.
Oh, hey, Shubhavia.
Hi, Polly. Good to see you.
Oh, I'm here.
This is not the moment to check.
No, it's not. But I thought I would anyway.
As you can see, I look as if I'm in the Adhisthana shrine room on my own, but in fact, there's a big crowd of people all around the back of the screen. I might get you all to sit around the front.
I'll sit down here. Vi ska hitta hej från oss.
We're still waiting for a few people to arrive, I believe. While we're waiting, I'll just say that in the next few mornings and in the evenings before those sessions, we're going to do a quick sort of 15-minute hangout space. So if you arrive a bit early, I might get a few extroverts to just host you all. I'm sure we can conjure up a few. There's a few. Actually, I'm looking at a few in front of me right now on the screen. Yeah. So yeah, we'll just have a little space where people can just arrive early and talk about the team, talk about the groups, talk about the material, whatever you want to do. Yeah, it'd be great to have a slightly less formal space, because often these situations are so sort of directed, and have to be.
Got a hello from Sweden in Domagiri.
Yeah, hello from Sweden, indeed. I can see Vribodi, where's he now? He's on a different screen now. Yeah, we've got a few people coming in from outside the UK, so big welcome to you.
Mary Mary says hi from Liverpool.
Yeah, Liverpool's slightly outside the border, I reckon.
Hello from Belgium.
Yeah, yeah. Yes, Virginie, I can see you there. It's great to see you. Great, and well done on your letter for ordination. I'm so happy for you. Really fabulous. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Just in case you're wondering, Saddaloka is showing up on the screen as a dark square with his name on it, but in fact he's sitting in the shrine room. It's one of his great siddhis that he's developed over the years. He can be in two places at the same time. And also, when you received the link to this this event, you also received a one-line message saying that Ratnaguna wouldn't be appearing or wouldn't be on the event. So he's also got siddhi powers because, in fact, he is here this morning and will be doing the presentation. So he's absent and appearing at the same time. It's a sort of one of those elder order member things, you know? How many have we got so far?
60 people now.
Okay, a few more to come in. I think there are maybe 3 people. I know of at least 3 people who can't make this morning. Let me think. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, at least 3.
I've got a couple in here. Who aren't yet logged on.
That's true, good point. Okay, I'll maybe start. Okay, good. Find my notes to make sure I get all this in the right order. Good. Okay, so welcome to this online event. What have we given the name? Individuality, self-contained and boundless, with these 2 paradoxes, self-contained and boundless. My name is Saddhanandi and I live at Adhisthana, and I'm part of the team that's going to be running this event. Yeah, I'll introduce them in a minute. But a particular welcome to all of you, and especially if you're coming in from outside the UK, really great to see you all. And if English is your second language, then a big welcome to you too. It's great to have people coming in from different areas of the world, and on Zoom that is possible. If there's anything problematic with the language or the speed of how myself or the team are speaking, then just let us know in the chat, and the tech team here will feed that back to us, okay? Yeah, so we're currently in the Adhisthana Shrine Room, and for some of you that's going to be a very familiar place. You haven't seen it for a while, probably in person, but for some of you it's maybe a new place to visit. So behind me is the shrine, and then you've got this kind of aura of lights, and in each alcove there is a small Buddha Rupa, only about this 4 inches high, something like that. And they were given to Adhisthana from all centres, chapters, institutions from around the world, I think on the opening ceremony. And since then, different members from different institutions have come in and put another rupa onto that wall or onto that aura. I think the last, which was maybe this time last year, was Buddhafield, and it was great to see Amragita just place that rupa into that aura. So Adhisthana is radiating a quality of blessings, but actually we're also receiving a lot of blessings from all over the world, and we're manifesting within that. Yeah, so that's a bit of an introduction to the shrine room, and this huge, massive rupa, which we've got several of. It was one of those beautiful moments at the beginning of Adhisthana where Ratnaguna managed to find 3 or 4 rupas that had just come through the airport or just been waiting for somebody to pick it up from the airport for 10 years. And she found them and they were brought here. And we have one now at the entrance to Adhisthana and of course one in the shrine room. Yes, so a very big welcome. And what you can't see is over there in a far corner is a big, neat pile of cushions and mats. And they have been there for the last year, waiting for people to sit on them. And that hasn't happened pretty much, hasn't happened at all. So we're all looking forward to the day when this shrine room isn't as neat as that, but all in disarray with people and blankets and cases and lost property and all of that. But at the moment, it's all very tidy. Yeah, so we currently have about 7 people attending this event, and we have a large team of order members running that at the front. And we've got 3 of them sitting alongside me in the shrine room here. So that's Kashantikara, Shivavura and Sadloka, who all live here. And then outside Adhisthana, we have Vajra Pushpa, who lives just a few miles away, Parina, who lives in Amsterdam, Samatha in Cambridge, Pranyanita from the West London Buddhist Centre, Kalyani from Cardiff, Dana Abaya from way up north in Scotland. I said everybody. And of course, Ratnaguna, who should be alongside me right now, but he's been alongside me for a couple of weeks, sort of discussing the retreat, but only on Zoom. And I wish so much that you were here in the shrine room with me, Ratnaguna, just sitting here in front of all these people and introducing this event. Yeah, and we also have behind the scenes a tech team of 4 people. So Caroline and Patrick at the moment, and Rochni will be running the tech in the morning, and Lizzie will be coming in on the evening. Yeah, more or less, I think, or some of the evenings. Okay, so I'm going to just do a few rambles about the retreat, and then I'll hand over to Ratnaguna, and we're going to hear a presentation from Ratnaguna on a bit of an overview of the teachings, or the theme of individuality, the group, the spiritual community. Yeah. But to begin with, I'm just going to sort of just orientate us a little bit more with where this retreat's arrived from. And in preparation for the retreat, I've been listening to quite a few talks by different people, particularly Subhuti, Parami, and Sangharakshita. And I've been very struck by a very early lecture by Sangharakshita, by Bhante, from 1975. And at that point, this Buddhist movement was probably about 7 years old, I think. 8 years old, maybe. Yeah, watching the calculations going on in my team here. I think it was roughly 67. Yeah, so yeah, 8 years old. So small. I think Bhante talked about it as if it was a big movement that was starting to happen, but it was really just a few people in a room together. And in this little book called Human Enlightenment, this little book here, I've got this version, which was published in 1985, that the reprint was in 1985. In fact, from my flat, my community in Glasgow, when I worked for Windhorse Publications, there were 3 women on that team. And this book was produced from that team. And Yeah, he's giving a lecture on the meaning of the community, the meaning of community, yes. And you can see he's just sort of mulling over what that means. And you hear a couple of values coming through of that. You can hear how he's trying to establish something that's quite alchemical. He's trying to set up a context, a living, alive, dynamic context where we will learn about ourselves, we will support each other in practical help and in spiritual encouragement. He's also got a very strong vision of people being able to communicate from the basis of very strongly shared values. And he gives this lovely illustration in the lecture where he describes watching on a very early retreat. He watches two very different people doing communication exercises, which I won't go into right now. But the two people, one of them is a kind of a young northern guy from the north of Britain, working class, working maybe in industry or something, in communication with a middle-aged scholar woman from Oxford or Cambridge. And he describes their body language when they first come together and say that it's like they hardly know how to communicate together. And all their body language is saying, this is too much, I don't know why I'm here, I don't know how to deal with this person in front of me. And at the end of the communication exercises, they're laughing together, they're relaxed together. And he uses this as an illustration of there is something possible between human beings. There is something possible between, there's something that will connect us if only we can be in communication beyond just our differences. And it's part of his vision for a collective, for community. And then what's really interesting in that lecture is he then describes what a spiritual community would be. And he describes the sort of things that we'd be working with. And in that moment, he describes the root poisons of greed, hatred, and delusion, which I found very interesting that he puts that right at the center of this lecture on spiritual community. And he says the reason why we find each other difficult and the things that we are going to find difficult in collective practice are going to be rooted in these poisons. And I'll just read you the description of, say, craving. He's got them all there. And actually, maybe Caroline can put the words into the chat at the moment. I'll just read you craving. Let's see it. So craving is a longing desire to possess objects of sensuous cognition which you like, and to include them in your ego identity, in the hope of getting a sense of security from having them as part of yourself. So this sounds a bit sort of abstract, but basically he's saying that at the root of everything, there are these three poisons which are driving us, and they're all functioning as a way of trying to create something pleasant and secure for ourselves. And in communication with other people, we begin to see very negative habits arising. And at the root of that, there is a sense of a need for security. And if we can drill down to that level, we begin to learn something very profound about ourselves. We begin to learn how security and the desire for something pleasant, or the desire for something to remove something unpleasant, or to try and keep away from anything that's going to challenge ourselves, all of that is at the root of everything. And this is what we are going to struggle with in community, in collective practice. So he's putting this right at the center of this really early lecture on what is collective practice. And I think more recently, we've coined this phrase, Sangha as Guru. I've certainly given a couple of talks on the Sangha or the order as guru. And I think that is his model, that we are setting up a context where we can learn from. We can learn about ourselves, we can learn about each other. Yes, it's encouraging, yes, it's supportive, and it's a place where we're going to actually discover who we are. I think all spiritual, religious situations probably have some flavour of that. I remember maybe 25 years ago, I went to a Zen monastery with Samatha, actually. We went and stayed in a Zen monastery in the north of Britain and did a weekend there. So just so you know, we slept in the shrine room. The whole weekend event of newcomers slept in the shrine room. And the shrine room was divided into two at night, so that men slept on one side of a curtain and the women slept on the other side. And then a bell was rung in the morning and we all had to get up, and we knew the curtain was going to be drawn in 10 minutes. Yeah. And all the food was laid out very disciplined. There was little labels at each place. There was a certain etiquette around it. There was a lot of bowing. There was a lot of ritual. There was a lot of form to that context. And I remember sitting down at my place and discovering that a monk who was sitting next to me was sitting in my place. But I didn't mind. I said to him, should we just swap our labels? But then another monk saw this and they said, no, you can't swap labels. You have to swap your place. And well, this form would certainly bring out different aspects of one's personality, and you would really have to surrender to it. But it would draw something out of you, and that's a different kind of context. That's a different kind of learning context, actually. But maybe it does the same thing in a certain way. In comparison, Sri Ratna hasn't got so much form, although we've been through periods in our history where there's been quite a lot of form at different times. Yeah, and I think that, well, me and Samatha spent an hour and a half with the head abbot at the end of our visit and just talked through what it was like to hold responsibility in that community, and what it was like to be a head abbot in a Zen monastery. He was a very lovely, interesting guy. And I think there have been times in Sri Ratna where the form and the group pressure has been the head abbot. I'm just throwing that on the table right now. The kind of guiding principle, and we freed ourselves up from that quite a lot. So the form of community, the form of collective practice has gradually taken shape. But basically, Bhante had a vision. He had a really simple vision, which was that every human being can be in communication with one another if only we can get beyond differences and go deeper and discover what our core values are, what our similarities are. And he also knew that we needed context where we could work through the mental poisons of greed, hatred, and delusion. And he thought if he threw us together as a collective, that's where it would get drawn out and we'd get reflected back. But unfortunately, that learning context, that let's say that learning context that he was setting up, that feedback system, that alive, dynamic, collective system that he was trying to create, is very dependent on the level of spiritual attainment or the level of individuality of the members of that community. And as we all know, that can be at times a bit patchy. Yeah. So in order to create a really strong learning collective context, you need people who are rising into that. And hence the very strong emphasis on individuality. This community can only be created at that level where we could actually all move forward, keep moving forward. That can only happen with a lot of individuals engaging with that. So individuality is at the core of all our collective practices. Yeah. So this is the sort of material that we're going to go into over the next few days. And I just want us to stay in touch with those early values of Bhante, that we can all be in communication with one another at that deeper level, and that we are trying to create something between us, which will actually help all of us move forward. Yeah. So maybe I'll hand over now to Ratnaguna, who's going to give us a bit of an overview of that material, and then we'll come back to me, and I'll do a little bit more of what the retreat is all about. Yeah. And if you guys want to come round here, or move the chairs or whatever, that would also be fine. If you want to see Ratnaguna, we're just going to pin him up.
Okay, very good. Let me just, yeah, I had myself on the screen. I don't like giving talks to myself. It's a very strange experience. Thank you very much, Saddhanandi, for that lovely introduction. And I'm very, very sorry I'm not sitting next to you right now. Today is a good day for me because I woke up without a headache, and you may be looking at me through the talk and thinking, well, he looks okay to me. He's got loads of energy, but no, I'm not okay sometimes. So that's why I felt I had to withdraw from leading the retreat with Saddhanandi. But when I'm well, I'm going to join you as much as I can. By the way, Saddhanandi, I love that story of Ratnaguna finding these massive great rupas in an airport. And I was thinking, how did she get them back to Adhisthana? Did she hire a bus or whatever? You might have to clarify exactly what you meant there. But anyway, yes, I'm going to give a talk on the spiritual community, the individual and the group. And I want to begin by taking you back in time to 1958. Many of you won't have even been born by then. 1958, the 1st of August, was my 5th birthday. And I remember it was my first memory. It's that's as far back as my memory goes. And I just remember a snippet of my 5th birthday. We lived in a bungalow, and my parents must have organized a party for me because there were kids there, you know, friends, neighbors, school kids. And they were, we were having what a kids' party is like. You know, we had cake and jelly, and there was lots of laughter, there was shouting, there was running around and screaming, and probably a little bit of crying as well. And I was all in the midst of this, in the center of it in a way, because it's my birthday. But at some point I went to the toilet, as you do. And in the bungalow, I remember closing the door because it's a sliding door. It wasn't hinged, it was sliding. So I slid the door to, and then there was a little catch that went into a hook to lock it. So I remember doing that and locking the door. And then it didn't go quiet, of course, because, you know, the kids were all still having a great time out there. But it was muffled. The sound was muffled. And I found myself in this space, the toilet, which was apart from the party in a way. I could hear it, but I wasn't in it. And I had this sudden sense that I was me. I remember, I think I even said to myself, oh, this is me. And I had this sense of I was separate from all the other kids and everyone else in the universe. In fact, it was just me alone here in this space. And with it came a sense, it was quite an exciting moment. And I think I would say that the way I felt was there was a sense of wonder. It's like, oh, this is me. And also with it came a sense of serenity. Perhaps the serenity was there because all the noise was going on outside and it wasn't going on where I was in this space. But I think it might have been something else. It might have been the serenity came with the wonder of realizing that I was a separate individual. So I went to the toilet, opened the door and went back out. And of course, I lost it all. There I was again, yeah, laughing and shouting and so on and so on. And but I didn't forget it, as you can see, I'm remembering now. It was a really pivotal moment for me. A little bit like what I'm going to talk about now, which is I'm going to take us way back beyond there to the late 19th century, early 20th century, Austria in Europe. In those days when men always wore suits with waistcoats, and they always had big moustaches, and they always wear a hat when they went out, always, whatever the weather, they had to wear a hat. And one of these men was a man called Karl Jaspers, who was Austrian-German, and he was a psychiatrist who later became a philosopher. And he wrote this book called The Origins of History, a very, very important book, seminal book, really. And in that book, he identified a certain period of time which he thought was really, really important. And he called it the axial age, or the axial period. And he identified certain places in the world where remarkable things had happened. So in China, for instance, around that time, you get Confucius and his disciples, Mencius and so on. And then you get Lao Tse and Chuang Tzu of the Taoist tradition, and you get others, of course. Funnily enough, connecting to my childhood again, when I was about 15, a little bookshop opened in Marlow, where I lived. It was only a small town. And so I went in there, and there was this very small section of kind of Eastern books. So I bought the Tao Te Ching for some reason, and I read it. I read the whole thing. I didn't understand it, but it gave me a sense of serenity again, calm. And so I went back to the shop a little while later, and the next book I bought was by or about a man called Mencius, one of Confucius's main disciples. So I read that too. And then I went back and I bought a book by Christmas Humphreys on Buddhism, and that was the worst one. It was really quite a boring book that I didn't like it very much, but it didn't put me off. But yes, there we are. So going back to Karl Jaspers and the axial age, then you get Persia with Zoroaster. There are probably others as well. Palestine with Amos, Isaiah, Jeremiah, the second Isaiah, apparently. Greece, of course, Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, everyone's familiar with those names. Epictetus, you had the Platonists, the Aristotelians, the Stoics, the Cynics, the other ones, can't remember their names right now. Never mind. And then, of course, you also had the great poets and playwrights, Homer, Pindar, Aesop, Aristophanes, Sophocles, and so on. Epicureans, thank you, Paul. That's it, the Epicureans, yes, very good. So all that was happening between 800 BCE. BCE means before Common Era. We used to say BC, before Christ, but that's too Christocentric. So now we say BCE, 800 BCE, and he thought 200 BCE, but it's more recently been changed to 300 BCE. There have been a number of books written about that idea, and one of them is by Karen Armstrong. She calls it the Great Transformation. That's the way she sees the axial age. Subtitle: The World in the Time of Buddha, Socrates, Confucius, and Jeremiah. Yeah, very interesting. So now, why am I telling you all this? It's because all these people in these different parts of the world, they all thought very differently. You know, if they'd have met each other, they would have had arguments about reality and the way you should behave and so on, the way you should see the world. But they had one thing very much in common, something very important. They were individuals, meaning that they had managed to somehow free themselves from the groups to which they belonged. And what I mean by that is they'd emancipated themselves from the ideas, the norms, the mores, the ways of thinking, the ways of looking at the world that they were brought up with as part of their group or their tribe or their country, whatever. and that they'd sort of emerged and looked out and began to think for themselves and look at the world in their own particular way. So that's where the idea of individuality really comes from. And one of the things I really like about Sangharakshita, I'm going to call him Bhante, because Bhante means teacher, and he's my teacher, so I'm going to call him Bhante. What was I saying? Oh, yes. What was I saying? Forgot. This happens to me these days. I'm in the middle of something and I go on something else. I can't remember where I was going with it, but never mind. Oh, no, that's it. Bhante. One of the things I really like about Bhante is that he didn't teach the Dharma. He taught the Dharma within a whole context of the world. And he saw Buddhism as part of a very important stream, which is running through the world, which is connected with the other great, I forgot to mention India, didn't I, earlier? In India, you get the Upanishads, Mahavira, the great Jain teacher, and of course the Buddha. And so Bhante saw definite connections between the Buddha, between Zoroaster, Amos, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Confucius, Lao Tse, Aristotle, Socrates, Plato, etc., etc. He saw really connections, differences, of course, but connections too. And so we, as a Buddhist movement, are part of a great stream of encouragement to become individuals. I think that's really important. So my brief this morning is to introduce that to you, but also to define some terms. I'm going to define the group, the individual, and the spiritual community this morning. So let me talk about the group. The group is a collective of people tied together by, first of all, blood. So the first group you're born into is your family, of course. That's a group tied together by blood relations. So you've got your mother and father, you might have brothers and sisters, you'll have uncles and aunts, probably, grandparents, all sorts of people, and so you get a whole bunch of people who make up a family. They might all live together, they might live in different places, but they're a family. And you kind of identify with that family. I'm part of that family. Then the next group you realize you're in is tied together by soil, the territory you live in. In very olden days, you get a village which is a tribe. For instance, in the Buddha went to Kesaputta one day, and he went to a place called Kamala, and that's where all the Kamalas lived. They were all a tribe. They lived in that village. And so you get tribes. And then as time went on, as history went on, you had tribes, villages, and then city-states, great big conglomerations of people. And then, of course, countries. So that's what a group is, really. A group is people tied together by identifying with blood, soil, village, city, country, and so on. And the thing about a group is you feel you belong. It gives you a sense of belonging, and also, importantly, gives you a sense of security, going back to what Saddhanandi was saying, that wonderful definition. I love those definitions of from a Tibetan source. But security is really, really important to us, and the group tends to give us that. Now, the thing about a group is it gives you that security, it gives you love and so on, but it also divides you against people from other groups. So you always get this sense, don't you, that the group I'm in is the best one. It's always, the group you're in is always the best. The town I come from is better than the town next door. Oh yes, Marlow is better than Cookham, yeah, by a mile. And football teams. Okay, so football is a great big thing in the West, and you get tribes of people who follow a certain football team. And I've heard this phrase, the football community, which doesn't exist. The football community is a whole bunch of warring tribes, really, who hate each other. Paul has just asked me, your Marlowe asked us to compare with Stanley, what's his name? Yeah, he was just over in Cookham. Yes, where was I? That distracted me again. Yes, so like in Manchester, you get two great football teams, Manchester City and Manchester United, and they hate each other. The supporters hate each other. And a few years ago, it was touch and go whether Manchester United or Manchester City would take the cup. And some naive commentator said, well, you know, the people of Manchester will be happy whichever one wins. Absolutely not. Manchester United supporters hate Manchester City supporters with a passion, and any other team that won that cup other than Manchester United would be okay, but certainly not Manchester City, and the other way around. So the interesting thing is that groups, they divide people as well, and the closer those groups are together, the more antipathy there is between them. Think of the antipathy between England and Scotland. There's not that antipathy between England and Italy or England and Australia, but it's because we're really close together and we rub up against each other. So to carry on with the group is tied together by blood, soil, but also by power. Conformity is very important in a group. As long as you conform, you're fine, you're safe, you're loved, you're liked, and so on. But when you begin to differ from the group, you find yourself in difficulties. You get in groups, you get insiders and outsiders, and the insiders are good and the outsiders are not good. So if you become a critic of the group, you tend to be somewhat ostracized. It's interesting that when you're in a group, and we're all in groups to a certain extent, when you're in a group, you don't really know you're in a group. There's a rap artist called Zuby, don't know if you've heard of him, but he said something really funny, but also very true, which is, human beings are herd animals who think they're individuals. That should be written up on the wall somewhere. Human beings are herd animals who think they're individuals, because when you're in group consciousness, you do think, oh, I've come back into group consciousness. No, you carry on, you think you're an individual, you're thinking you make your own decisions and so on, but no, you're just following the dictates of the group. Okay, now I tend to be painting the group as a bad thing, but it's not. The group isn't a bad thing. It's absolutely necessary. We need groups, we need countries, we need a sense of solidarity with other people who we live with and so on. So that's okay, but they can be negative. So one of the things that Banti did is he made a distinction between what he called the positive group and the negative group. So the positive group it has group norms and group behaviors and so on, and it wants conformity, but it also is fairly loose and it allows you to differ in certain ways. It allows you to be yourself, or at least it tolerates you being yourself and having slightly different views. Importantly, the positive group is one where you're free to grow to become an individual. Yeah, it doesn't stop people from becoming individuals. That's the most important thing, really. A negative group is very different. It enforces conformity with power. When you read the history of the world, I've done a bit of history reading recently, and what you can see throughout history is negative groups forcing people to have certain beliefs, forcing them to have a certain religion, not allowing them to have another religion, and even then not having a certain understanding of that religion. You know, England in the time of Henry VIII, it was Protestants and Catholics, and they persecuted one another. And nowadays, of course, you get totalitarian regimes, as you have in the past, and you know what they are. They're either communist or they're fascist, or they're a religion of some kind. And in those totalitarian regimes, difference is not allowed. Conformity is enforced by imprisonment, by torture, by death. And you know that's happening now, don't you, in various parts of the world. Okay, so that's the group, positive and negative. So now I want to talk about the individual. first thing to say about the individual is I'm going to talk about some of the main characteristics of the individual, what makes someone an individual, but I just want to sound a note of warning here, because Sangharakshita once said that actually, although you can talk about the characteristics of the individual, you cannot pin an individual down to just those characteristics. The individual is somewhat unfathomable, and the characteristics are inexhaustible. So you can't kind of pigeonhole an individual in that kind of way. But nevertheless, I'm going to talk about some of the main characteristics that Sangharakshita identified as an individual. So the first one is self-awareness. And this one is the bedrock, it's the seed out of which individuality comes. An individual is aware of themselves. So going back to my 5th birthday experience, that's when I became aware of myself as a separate person. And that was a moment of individuality. So the individual is self-aware, but they're also aware of other people. And they're aware of other people, not as members of their group, but as at least potential individuals. They're aware of their environment around themselves. And I don't think Sangharakshita has said this, he may have done, but I think what an important aspect of this awareness is an awareness of a sense of transcendence, a sense of otherness, a sense of, I don't know, can't think of another way to put it, of transcendence, a possibility of transcendence. And I think I had that on my 5th birthday, transcendence in the toilet. I had this, not only this sense of being alone and on my own and being myself, but also this sense of wonder, which I think was a sense of transcendence. It was very exciting. Anyway, so awareness, and this is why the Buddha taught mindfulness. He taught mindfulness so that people could develop that sense of self, that sense of awareness, reflexive self-awareness. And he also taught the mindfulness of breathing for many reasons, but also one of the reasons was to develop that sense of being who you are. And this is the title of this retreat is self-contained and boundless. This is the self-contained aspect of it, that you realize you are a person different from others and so on. So then the second characteristic I want to talk about is the individual is emotionally positive. Now this is important because there's a danger when you begin to free yourself from the group. There's a danger of you looking at the group, the members of the group, and feeling a sense of contempt towards them, calling them the herd. Oh, look at those stupid people. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know why they're doing it. They're just following the group, following what everyone else says and so on. It's very easy to feel contemptuous and look down on them. But the individual doesn't do that. The individual sees the great limitations of the group and the downsides of the group, also sees the upsides of the group, but feels compassionate towards members of the group. Hence, that's why the Buddha taught the 4 Brahma Viharas, the Metta Vihara, Metta Bhavana, Karuna Bhavana, compassion, Mudita Bhavana, sympathetic joy, and Upeksha Bhavana. That's why. And here, what was I going to say here? Yeah. So there's another reason why the Metta Bhavana is so important, in my opinion. Again, I'm not sure that Bhante has said this, but he could have done. But one of the reasons I think the Metta Bhavana is so important is because what keeps us tied to the group is a very strong emotional dependence. It's very, very strong. You only know how strong it is when you go against it. Then it really hits you. But it's a very strong dependence on others, on being part of that group. The sense of belonging and security comes with that. Metta helps you to become strong. Metta is a strong emotion. It's a sense of strength, and that helps you to free yourself from your need to belong to the group. So I've talked about self-contained, and this is the boundless element of it. In the Metta Sutta, where the Buddha teaches the Metta Bhavana, he says that what you're trying to do in the end is you're trying to radiate metta outwards in 6 directions: before, above, behind, to the left, and to the right. In all directions, boundlessly, apamana, boundless. There's no end to it. So this is one of the reasons why we've called this retreat Individuality, self-contained and boundless, because there's this lovely paradox of being self-contained, self-aware, but also boundless in your love for beings. We'll say more about this as we go on. Third characteristic I want to tell you about is that the individual takes responsibility for themselves. Only an individual can take full responsibility for themselves. Group members don't really take responsibility for themselves because they're not really aware of being a separate being. So, because you're an individual, because you realize you're separate from the group, you take responsibility then for your actions as a result of that. And another way of saying that, a more Buddhist way of saying that, is an individual is sensitive to the law of karma. They're aware of the law of karma, that anything they think, say, and do is going to have effects on themselves, but also probably on other people too. So they take care in that kind of way. Hence sila, hence ethics. That's why the Buddha taught ethics. Hence our own important practice of ethics in our movement, hence the 5 precepts and the 10 precepts. And these are not rules. They're not group norms. They're not things you have to do because you're a Buddhist. That would just mean we're a Buddhist group. The precepts are expressions of a profound understanding that you are a separate individual who has effects on other people. And so when the Buddha was teaching his son Rahula about ethics, he didn't give him any precepts. He said, I want you to reflect. When you act out of greed, what happens? When you act out of hatred, what happens? When you act out of ignorance, what happens? I want you to reflect on that and report back to me, because that is actually the basis of ethics. Yeah, okay. The next characteristic is the individual is creative. Doesn't mean the individual is a poet or a painter or a composer necessarily. They may be. What it means is creative as opposed to reactive. So when you're reactive, as you know, you just do things without thinking and out of probably a negative state of mind, but the individual doesn't do that. The individual takes each situation as new and fresh, which it is, of course, and they respond in a new and fresh way to every situation they're in. They create, in a way, the individual creates the world that they're in afresh at every moment, every day. There's a lovely story of this. You all know the story of Kisagotami, the poor young woman whose child had died, and she could not accept the death of her child. And there she was holding this dead child. You know the story, but she went to the Buddha and said, can you help me? And he could see that the child was deaf, but he did not say, I'm sorry to break the news to you, Kisagotami, but your child is dead, actually. And this is a chance for you to gain insight, because all things are impermanent. He didn't say that because he knew that wouldn't work. What did he do? He said, look, what I want you to do is find a mustard seed. I can do that. Yeah, I can do that. Yeah, but it has to be from a household where no one has died. Okay, I'll go and do that. And of course, you know the story. Every household she went had a mustard seed, but every household she went to, someone had died. And bit by bit, as she went through this process, she realized that her child was dead, and she began to accept it and became one of the Buddha's disciples. And it's a beautiful story. We all know it, but what creativity, amazing creative response to this terrible situation. I probably wouldn't have done that. Yeah. I'm not that creative. But also, very importantly, you create yourself. The individual is constantly creating themselves, becoming a new person. And there's a line or a verse in the Dhammapada, verse 80, where the Buddha says this: irrigators draw off waters, fletchers straighten arrows, carpenters shape wood, the spiritually mature discipline themselves. This is Sangharakshita's translation. I've read another translation where the translator had the spiritually mature shape themselves, just as a carpenter shapes the wood, which is what we're trying to do. We're trying to shape ourselves. We're trying to create ourselves into a new person. Number 6, the individual is often unpopular. I would like to just change that a little bit, because in my experience, well, observation and experience, is that the individual elicits very strong reactions from people. You either love them or you hate them. And you can see this with Sangharakshita, Bhante, of course. He is loved by many of his disciples. I mean, I love Sangharakshita. I know that Saddhanandi does, and many of my friends do. We just think he's a great guy. And we know he hasn't been completely skillful in his life, but none of us are. But we just love him. He's just a wonderful man. But as we know, there are many people in the world who hate Sangharakshita with a vengeance. They hate him. They would like to see our movement destroyed. And for the last 20 years of his life, well, in his life, when you read his life story, you can see that he made enemies, many enemies all over the place. Not because he was horrible to people, but because he told what he considered to be the truth. He would say, no, that's not the Dharma, that's not the Dharma. And no, that's wrong. We shouldn't be doing that. And he'd tell people that. And if you do that throughout a lifetime, by the end of your life, you've got a whole bunch of people who are out to get you. And that's exactly what happened to Bhante the last 20 years of his life. He came in for so much criticism. Yeah, well, he brought it upon himself, you could say. Interestingly enough, a couple of years ago, I read a 3-volume biography of Franz Liszt, or Ferenc Liszt, the Hungarian pianist and composer. And it was very similar what happened to him as what happened to Bhante. He was a very famous pianist, and he had many young students who were more like disciples. They loved him, and they learned from him how to play the piano. They learned how to compose. They learned how to become conductors, and they went off on their various careers. And they loved him, and many other people loved his music, but some people hated him, hated his music, and they wanted to destroy him. It's an amazing guy, Liszt, because he was part of the Romantic movement, which is a new movement of music, which a lot of people didn't like. That's what happens, isn't it? When new music comes out, people don't like it. And but he helped some young composers. He played their music in his concerts and so on. Schumann, Mendelssohn, Wagner especially. He really helped them. He helped Wagner in many, many ways. But as life went on, some of them turned against him, shamefully. These people he'd helped, they turned against him. And some people hated his music. How can you hate music that much? I mean, I don't particularly like Liszt's music, but how can you hate someone's music? But that's what tends to happen to individuals. And I would say that Liszt didn't have all the qualities of the individual, but he had many of them. So the Buddha was very unpopular with certain people. Some Brahmins really didn't like the Buddha at all. Members of other religious orders didn't like the Buddha at all. He was very unpopular. Confucius apparently was very unpopular in his time. He's driven from state to state. Apparently, he nearly died of hunger in a ditch. Everyone knows the story of Socrates. He was sentenced to death for corrupting the youth. Where have I heard that before? Corrupting the youth. He actually had the chance. He was given the opportunity to escape to another country. He didn't take it. He said, no, I'll die for my beliefs. Amazing. this is another actually really important characteristic of the individual, isn't it? The individual is courageous. You have to have a lot of courage to be an individual. You really do. As I said earlier, you don't know how hard it is to go against a group until you do it. And then, my goodness, it gets really hard then. Anyway, another one. Okay, I think this is the last. Yeah, this is the last characteristic I'm going to talk about today, which is aloneness. The individual has a sense of aloneness. There's a word for this in Pali, viveka, which means alone. It means solitude. It means seclusion, but it also means lonely. And this, when you start becoming an individual and realizing, in a sense, that you're alone, you're on your own, this is both a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing because you're free, you're allowed to think for yourself and so on and make your own way in life. But it's also a curse in that you can become very lonely, you become ostracized, you can become isolated, and so on. There's this wonderful text from the Sutta Nipata early. It's one of the earliest of the Buddhist texts, called the rhinoceros or the rhinoceros horn. And it's just verses, verse, verse, verse. And the refrain of each verse is wander lonely as a rhinoceros. And many, many verses. And there's a couple of verses in there where the Buddha says, if you can find a really good spiritual friend, well, wander with that friend. But if you can't, then wander lonely as a rhinoceros. So we really do need to be prepared to do that. Hence, one of the things we encourage people to do is go on solitary retreats, to get used to being alone, to get used to building their own self-reliance so they don't need other people for their own happiness and so on. Yeah. Okay, we come to the last part of the talk now. The spiritual community. What is that? How does that connect with all this? And already Saddhanandi has spoken about that, but let's go back to the individual for a few moments. One of the things the individual does is he or she encourages other people to become individuals. Yeah, that's what the Buddha did, didn't it? The Buddha, what happened to him? He gained enlightenment, but before he gained enlightenment, he was with 5 friends who they were practicing the what they call austerities. And after 5 years or so, he realized it didn't work. And he said he's not going to do that then anymore. What did they do? They cancelled him, to use a modern phrase. They ostracized him. They didn't want any more to do with him. You're a bad person. You've gone back to the low life. We want nothing else to do with you. So he had to go on his own. Again, he did that a number of times. But then he gained enlightenment. What did he do? He looked for those 5 friends because they were friends of his. They ostracized him, but he didn't ostracize them. So he went to them and he managed to turn them around and they joined him. So then he had the beginning of a spiritual community. So that's what starts a spiritual community. I mentioned Greece earlier, didn't I? And Aristotle and Plato and all those guys. Well, there's a very interesting scholar. He died a few years ago, called Pierre Hadot, French philosopher, who taught that the ancient Greek philosophies were not philosophies in the modern sense of the term of thinking. They were spiritual paths and spiritual communities. It's a book called Philosophy as a Way of Life, Pierre Hadot, wonderful book, well worth reading. And so the Platonists, they were a spiritual community. They had practices that they did, spiritual practice. And the Socratic dialogue, according to Hadot, was a spiritual practice. It wasn't a logical practice, it was a spiritual practice. What happened is Socrates tried to get his interlocutor into the space where they realized they don't know. Oh, and then they begin to learn. They begin to really take responsibility for themselves. The same with the Epicureans and the Stoics and the Cynics. All these words, we don't really understand them as these days. The Cynics weren't cynical in the modern sense of the term. Anyway, So what is a spiritual community? The spiritual community is not ideally a group. Yeah. A spiritual community ideally is a free association of individuals. That's very idealistic. You do get religious groups, of course. Of course you do. Religious groups are not spiritual communities in the strict sense of the term. This is why, incidentally, when you get ordained into the Triratna Buddhist order, you have two ordination ceremonies. First of all, you have your private ordination ceremony, and that's in a room or in a tent or wherever, just with you and your preceptor, just you alone with your preceptor. They ordain you. They don't ordain you into the Triratna Buddhist order. They ordain you. And that symbolizes the fact that you as an individual are going for refuge to the three jewels. And even if no one else in the whole world was going to do it, you would still do it because you're an individual. Then the next day or a few days later, you have your second ordination ceremony, which is the public ordination. And there's loads of people there, friends, sometimes relatives, cheering you on, as it were. And at that point, when you get the case around your neck, you join the Triratna Buddhist order. You become a member of the Triratna Buddhist order, but as an individual. You don't join as a group member. That's the very important symbolism of the private and the public ordination. In practice, in reality, a spiritual community comes and goes. You can only be in a spiritual community when everyone in that spiritual community is acting as an individual and taking responsibility for themselves. So within our own order, sometimes you will be with a bunch of order members and you, one or two of you and maybe others, you slip back into group behavior. This happens a lot. There are factions within the order, to be quite honest, oh, we don't like those people who think this and so on. That does happen, unfortunately. But there are times also, happily, luckily, when everyone in the room or everyone, whatever situation, all the order members are actually as individuals. And they're taking responsibility for themselves. They're listening to what other people say, and they're taking account of that and so on. And then you have these moments, periods of spiritual community, periods of free association of individuals, and then it falls away again, perhaps. Yeah. So in our movement, you've got the Triratna Buddhist community, and you've got the Triratna Buddhist order. So let me go back to this idea of the positive group. The positive group, you remember, is a group which encourages, a very positive group, encourages individuality. And that's what the Triratna Buddhist community is doing. It's a group of people, some of whom will be individuals, but some will not be, but that doesn't really matter. It's a group of people who value the three jewels, and they value the ideal of individuality. Yeah. And asking for ordination is, in a way, it's saying, look, I really value individuality, and I'm an individual in some senses, but I'd like to be a true individual. And that's what it really means. Well, that's one of the meanings of asking for ordination. So the Triratna Buddhist order, you could say, is an aspiring spiritual community. Sometimes it is, sometimes perhaps not, or maybe in some parts of it is sometimes, and some parts of it's not sometimes. It's a process. It's not a fixed thing, just as we're all processes. So we're in a process of becoming more and more a real spiritual community, a free association of individuals. Much more than I could say, but I've probably been going on for too long already. I haven't managed to fit in a near enemy of the individual, which is the individualist. We'll have to do that a bit later on. And there's another thing that we're going to be talking about towards the end of the retreat, which is a state of mind beyond even individuality. I'll say no more about that, and I'll hand back to Saddhanandi.
Thank you, Ratnaguna. That was great to hear that, all of that. You lay it out so sort of clearly with such lovely sort of lightness to you. Thank you. And just before this talk, I came up with a few questions for the group. I'm just wondering if you've got any questions that you think would be helpful for us in the group at all. Ratnaguna? You don't have to.
Thank you, Rachel. You sent me 3 questions that we could ask, and I'm happy with those. I don't think I've got any more to say. I think the main thing is people break into groups and look at those questions and make it quite personal. You know, don't talk too abstractly. You've had the abstract talk. You know, you could even sort of think about, you know, am I an individual? To what extent am I an individual? What characteristics of the individual do I have? What characteristics are a bit weak and I'd like to strengthen them? Yeah, something like that.
Okay, all right, thank you. Maybe even if you've had an incident, maybe in the toilet where you've discovered you were more of an individual than you realized. It doesn't have to be the toilet. We're not setting any kind of precedent here at all. And I won't say anything else about the retreat because I think we've been in this situation for long enough. We need a break. I'll just say that we are going to be divided into groups, and these are the groups that will be staying through. Will be staying in those same groups throughout the week. And Parina, who's leading one of the groups, cannot do this session, so that group will be without a leader. So I'm just going to read you out the names of the people in that group, and if you're one of them, when you get to your group, you'll realize that Parina's missing. Okay. So that's Helen Lewis, Lucy Brioni, Philippa O'Connor, Bridget Hildenbrand, Liz Ashley, and Catherine Lloyd will also be joining later today. So that group, if you can just sort of follow these sort of pointers, that would be great. And Parina will be with you this afternoon. Yeah, she just, I really wanted her to be involved in the retreat, but she had some work to do this morning, unfortunately. And then we'll be in these groups for about an hour, and then we won't come back again together. We'll just meet again at later on today, in a few hours today. So I think maybe just a quick thank you again to Ratnaguna, and it's lovely to have you here live as opposed to just on screen. And yeah, just to capture some of your inspiration around this theme. And well, the Axel Age, I know when I first heard about it, how sort of, God, what would be the word? Inspiring I found it, because I could see, as someone who'd been through art school, I knew there were certain moments through the history of art where perceptions changed and a number of people realized how to do something in perspective, for instance. And that was like an Axel Age at that time of just, how do you went from Egyptian, everything was on the side, to suddenly people facing you. And even that was an Axel Age moment. It's so fabulous, yeah. So thank you to our world history, I think. And actually, well, there was one question I did think. When you said, Ratnaguna, when you said Bhante taught Buddhism in the context of the world, can you just give me a strap line on that one again?
Ask me that question again.
Bhante taught Buddhism in the context of the world. What you? I think you did say something, but I still haven't quite caught it.
Yeah.
Do you know?
You see, it's possible, and I think sometimes we do this. We think of ourselves as being a little Buddhist group, and that's it. You know, we're just teaching people how to live better lives and, you know, go for refuge and so on. But actually, Buddhist groups like ours are really, really important to the world. We'll cover this later on in the retreat. There's a wonderful lecture, 1978, Bhante gave it. I'm looking at myself again, where he gave this lecture called A Vision of History. And he said one way of interpreting history is, it's been, since the Axial Age, it's been a conflict between the spiritual community and the group. And the spiritual community is really, really important for the world because people within the spiritual community become individuals. Sometimes when I used to teach the Dharma at the Manchester Buddhist Centre and it got to the wisdom bit, you know, when you discuss prajna. I said rather provocatively, look, I'm not interested in getting loads of you to become Buddhists. What I'm interested in encouraging you to become wise, because the world doesn't really need more Buddhists. It needs more wise people. And that's what I meant, really. And I think Bhante had that kind of outlook, that the world really, really needs people like us. We're not just getting on with a little hobby, somewhere. We have to have a positive effect on the world. It's our duty. Because you know what the world's like. It's terrible. It's samsara. It's suffering. And people are doing crazy, crazy things right now. And who's going to change that? Only individuals can change that. Anyway, that takes me into the final day.
Thank you. That's helpful. Okay, so let's take a 20-minute break and we'll be in our groups in 20 minutes. And thank you again to Ratnaguna. Yeah, thank you.